Welcome back to Her True Stories, where real women share their most powerful moments of triumph. I'm your host, and today's story comes from Vivian, a 58-year-old successful businesswoman who learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply revealing who you really are. This is a story about respect, family betrayal, and the sweet taste of justice served ice cold. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into Vivian's incredible tale of revenge. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell, and let's build this community of strong women supporting each other. Now, let's hear Vivian's story. My name is Vivian LaRoche, and at 58, I've learned that true power isn't about the money in your bank account or the properties you own, though I have plenty of both. True power is knowing exactly who you are and never apologizing for it. Looking at myself in the mirror of my penthouse apartment overlooking Manhattan, I see a woman who has weathered every storm life threw at her and emerged victorious. My platinum blonde hair falls in perfect waves past my shoulders. My skin still smooth thanks to good genetics and excellent skincare, and my green eyes hold the kind of steel that comes from building an empire from nothing. But I wasn't always this woman. 35 years ago, I was a 19-year-old girl named Vivian O'Sullivan, scrubbing toilets at the Grandview Hotel in Boston for minimum wage. My hands were raw, my back ached constantly, and I went home to a studio apartment that barely had heat. But even then, I was watching, learning, studying every detail of how that hotel operated. The guests would walk past me like I was invisible, which suited me fine. I heard their complaints about everything: the thread count of the sheets, the water pressure in the showers, the temperature of their morning coffee. I memorized every detail because I knew that someday I would own a place like this. And when I did, it would be perfect. It took me 15 years of saving every penny, working 3 jobs, and studying business at night school, but I finally bought my first property, a rundown bed and breakfast in Vermont. 5 years later, I owned 3 boutique hotels. 10 years after that, I had a chain of luxury resorts across New England. Today, LaRoche Luxury Hotels spans 12 countries with 48 properties and employs over 15,000 people. But success comes with a price, and mine was paid in loneliness and sacrifice. My marriage to David LaRoche, a kind man who gave me his name and believed in my dreams, ended when he couldn't handle my ambition. "You love those hotels more than you love me," he said during our divorce proceedings. He wasn't wrong, but I never apologized for it. Our daughter Clarissa was 8 when we divorced. I threw myself into building my empire, telling myself I was doing it for her, creating a legacy, ensuring she'd never have to scrub anyone's toilets. But children need their mother's present, not just providing, and I failed her in ways I'm still paying for today. Clarissa grew up beautiful, entitled, and resentful. She had every advantage: private schools, designer clothes, trust funds, but what she didn't have was respect for the work that provided those luxuries. To her, I was just the mother who was never home, who chose business meetings over ballet recitals, who built walls instead of relationships. 3 years ago, at 25, she married Chase Morgan, a 32-year-old investment banker who seemed to view our family's wealth as his personal ATM. From the moment I met him, I knew he was trouble. He had that particular brand of arrogance that comes from men who've never been told no, who believe their mediocre talents and family connections entitle them to everything they desire. "Your mother's quite the businesswoman," he'd said at their engagement party, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Must have been tough, working your way up from, what was it? Housekeeping?" The way he said it made my accomplishments sound like something shameful, something to be whispered about rather than celebrated. But I smiled politely, kissed his cheek, and said nothing. I was still hoping, then, that I could find a way to love this man my daughter had chosen. I was wrong. The signs were there, from the beginning. The way he spoke to waiters, demanding they bring him something decent to drink when he didn't like his wine selection. How he'd snap his fingers at hotel staff when he wanted attention, treating them like servants rather than professionals. The cruel nickname he had for our longtime housekeeper, Maria, the help, said with just enough contempt to make it clear he considered her beneath notice. Clarissa not only tolerated this behavior, she encouraged it. She'd laugh when he berated a valet for taking too long with their car, or when he complained loudly about service that wasn't fast enough, perfect enough, expensive enough. My daughter, who had been raised with every privilege, had learned to look down on the very people who made her comfortable life possible. It broke my heart, but I held my tongue. I told myself that maybe marriage would mature her, that she'd grow out of this phase. I even convinced myself that my own absence during her childhood had somehow contributed to this attitude, and that I owed it to her to stay silent. But silence, I've learned, is often mistaken for weakness. Anne Chase Morgan was about to discover that I am many things: ruthless, calculating, unforgiving when crossed, but weak has never been one of them. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my corner office on the 42nd floor, reviewing acquisition reports for a chain of boutique hotels in California, when Clarissa's name appeared on my screen. "Mother," she said without preamble, "Chase thinks we should take a family vacation. Somewhere tropical. To bond." The word bond came out like she was tasting something unpleasant. I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair. "A family vacation." "Yes." Chase suggested that resort you just bought in Florida, the one in Key West. "He says it's supposed to be nice." Her tone suggested she doubted this assessment. The Sunset Bay Resort. I'd acquired it 6 months earlier from a family that had owned it for 3 generations, but couldn't compete with the corporate chains. It was a gem. 97 rooms of old Florida charm with modern luxury, pristine beaches, and the kind of service that made guests feel like they were the only people on Earth who mattered. "When were you thinking?" I asked, already knowing I would agree. Despite everything, Clarissa was my daughter. If she was reaching out, even at her husband's suggestion, I would take it. "Next weekend." Chase has some business meetings in Miami afterward, so it works out perfectly. Of course it did. I should have seen it then, the real reason for this sudden desire for family time. But hope makes us blind to warning signs we would otherwise spot from miles away. "I'll arrange everything," I told her. "The penthouse suite is lovely this time of year." "Actually," Clarissa said quickly, "we'd prefer to book our own accommodations. You know how Chase is about independence." Independence. As if accepting my hospitality would somehow compromise his masculine pride. But I agreed because I wanted this to work. I wanted my daughter back, even if it meant swallowing my pride and accepting her husband's peculiarities. "Of course, darling. I'll just book myself a regular room. We can meet for dinner on Friday night." "Perfect," she said, and for a moment, she sounded almost pleased. "This will be good, Mother. Really good." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the city I'd conquered. Somewhere below, people were checking into my hotels, eating in my restaurants, celebrating anniversaries, and closing business deals in spaces I'd created. My empire stretched across continents, employed thousands, and generated millions in revenue every year. But none of that mattered as much as the hope that maybe, finally, I could repair the relationship with the only family I had left. I should have known better. After all, I'd built my fortune on reading people, on understanding their motivations, and predicting their actions. The signs were all there, glaring as neon lights, but I chose to ignore them because I wanted so desperately to believe that my daughter still loved me. By Friday evening, I would learn the truth about what Clarissa and Chase really thought of me. And they would learn something too, something that would change all our lives forever. They would learn that Vivienne LaRoche didn't become a queen by accident, and queens don't forgive betrayal. They would learn that you should never, ever underestimate a woman who built her empire one room at a time. And most importantly, they would learn that some mistakes can't be undone, no matter how much you regret them afterward. The flight to Key West on my private jet should have been peaceful. 2 hours of solitude to prepare myself for what I hoped would be a healing weekend with my daughter. Instead, I spent the entire flight second-guessing my decision to travel separately from Clarissa and Chase. They wanted to fly commercial, I told myself, adjusting the laptop on the jet's mahogany table. Chase probably thinks it's more authentic than taking the family plane. But even as I rationalized their choice, something felt off. In all the years since her marriage, Clarissa had never turned down luxury when it was offered freely. I tried to focus on work, reviewing the latest customer satisfaction reports from the Sunset Bay Resort, checking the occupancy rates, studying the staff schedules. Everything looked perfect on paper. The resort was exceeding revenue projections by 15%, guest ratings averaged 4.8 stars, and my general manager, David Chen, ran the property with a kind of meticulous attention to detail that made me proud to have poached him from the Ritz-Carlton 5 years ago. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap of some kind. The plane touched down at Key West International at 3:47 p.m. on Friday. Instead of taking my usual car service, a black Mercedes that would announce my arrival to anyone paying attention, I called a simple taxi. If I was going to spend the weekend reconnecting with my daughter, I wanted to start as just another guest, not as the owner. It was a decision that would prove more revealing than I could have imagined. The drive to Sunset Bay Resort took 25 minutes through the narrow streets of Key West, past the pastel-colored houses and tourist shops selling t-shirts with cartoon fish. The taxi driver, a weathered man in his 60s named Carlos, kept up a steady stream of conversation about the weather, the fishing, and his granddaughter's quinceañera next month. "You staying at the Sunset Bay?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror as we turned onto Ocean Drive. "Nice place. My sister Rosa works in housekeeping there, says the owner's some fancy lady from New York who actually treats the staff like human beings. Rare thing these days." "Is it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, hell yes," Carlos said, warming to his subject. "Most of these resort owners, they don't give a damn about nobody. Fire you for looking at them wrong, cut your hours without warning, treat you like you're lucky to have a job cleaning up after rich tourists. But this LaRoche woman, Rosa, says she pays good wages, gives real benefits, even sent flowers when Rosa's husband died last year." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Those weren't grand gestures to me. They were simply the right things to do. But hearing that my efforts were noticed and appreciated by people like Rosa made every late night and difficult decision worth it. "Sounds like a good boss," I said. "The best," Carlos nodded. "Rosa's worked hotels for 30 years, and she says she ain't never had an owner who remembers her name, let alone sends her Christmas bonuses big enough to pay for her kids' school supplies." We pulled into the circular drive of the Sunset Bay Resort, and I felt the familiar surge of pride I always experienced when seeing one of my properties. The building was a masterpiece of old Florida architecture, coral stone walls, red tile roofs, and towering palm trees that created perfect shade over the entrance. Bougainvillea cascaded from wrought iron balconies, and the sound of steel drums drifted from the poolside bar. But more than the beauty of the place, what made me proud was the atmosphere. Guests moved through the lobby with relaxed smiles, staff members genuinely seemed happy to be there, and everything had that intangible quality that separates a good hotel from a great one, the feeling that every detail had been considered and every need anticipated. I paid Carlos, adding a generous tip that made his eyes widen. "You have a good weekend, lady," he said. "And if you see that LaRoche woman, tell her Carlos from Island Taxi says thanks for taking care of people like my Rosa." "I'll be sure to pass that along," I promised, shouldering my Louis Vuitton garment bag and wheeling my matching suitcase toward the entrance. The lobby was bustling with the controlled chaos of a Friday afternoon in peak season. Families with children checked in for week-long vacations, couples arrived for romantic getaways, and business travelers like myself queued patiently while the front desk staff worked with professional efficiency. I joined the line behind a family from Ohio. I could tell from their conversation about leaving the snow behind, and used the time to observe my staff in action. The front desk manager, Jennifer Walsh, was handling a complicated reservation change with grace and patience. One of the newer clerks, a young man I didn't recognize, was explaining the resort's amenities to an elderly couple with genuine enthusiasm. Everything looked perfect, exactly as it should. So, why did I have this growing sense of unease? "Next guest, please," called Jennifer, and I stepped forward to the marble counter. "Good afternoon," I said, placing my identification and credit card on the counter. "I have a reservation under La Roche." Jennifer's professional smile brightened genuinely when she saw my name on the screen. "Ms. La Roche, welcome back to Sunset Bay. We're so pleased to have you with us again." She glanced around quickly, then leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Chen wanted me to let him know the moment you arrived. Should I call him?" "No need," I said quietly. "I'm here for a family weekend. I'd prefer to keep things unofficial." Jennifer nodded immediately. "Of course. You're in our Ocean View Junior Suite on the 7th floor. Will you need assistance with your luggage?" "I can manage, thank you." As Jennifer processed my check-in, I noticed a commotion near the elevator bank. A man's voice, raised and demanding, cut through the lobby's ambient noise like a blade. "What do you mean the suite isn't ready? We had reservations. Do you know who I am?" I turned and felt my heart sink. Chase Morgan stood near the concierge desk, his face flushed with anger, pointing an accusatory finger at a young female staff member who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Clarissa stood beside him, not intervening, just checking her phone with bored annoyance. "Sir, I apologize for any confusion," the staff member, her name tag read Maria, was saying in carefully measured tones. "Your suite will be ready in about 30 minutes. We'd be happy to comp your drinks at the poolside bar while you wait, or—" 30 minutes. Chase's voice got louder. "I didn't fly down here to wait around because your housekeeping staff can't do their jobs. This is ridiculous." Other guests were starting to stare. A family with small children looked uncomfortable and moved away from the scene. An elderly couple whispered to each other behind their hands. The professional atmosphere I'd been admiring moments earlier was rapidly deteriorating into exactly the kind of public spectacle that could damage a hotel's reputation permanently. I should have intervened immediately. One word from me would have resolved the situation instantly. But something held me back, a growing realization that this scene was showing me something important about the man my daughter had married. "Chase, just let them get us drinks," Clarissa said, finally looking up from her phone. "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," Chase snapped, his attention still focused on poor Maria. "This is supposed to be a luxury resort. I'm paying premium prices for premium service, not to be jerked around by incompetent staff." Maria's composure was cracking. I could see her hands trembling slightly as she tried to maintain her professional smile. "Sir, I truly apologize. The previous guests in your suite had a late checkout, and we want to ensure everything is perfect for your arrival. If you'd like, I can speak with my manager about—" "Yes, get your manager," Chase demanded. "Get someone who can actually do something instead of making excuses." That's when I saw Jennifer start to move from behind the front desk, clearly intending to intervene. But I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. I wanted to see how this played out, to understand exactly who my son-in-law really was when he thought no one important was watching. What I saw made my blood run cold. Chase stepped closer to Maria, using his height, he was probably 6'2", to physically intimidate her. "Let me explain something to you, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a menacingly quiet tone. "I work 60-hour weeks to afford places like this. I don't come on vacation to deal with incompetence from people whose only job is to make my stay pleasant. So either you fix this problem right now, or I'm going to make sure your manager knows exactly how poorly you represent this establishment." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "I understand your frustration, sir. Let me call my supervisor immediately." "You do that," Chase said, crossing his arms. Then, loud enough for half the lobby to hear, he added, "Unbelievable. They hire these people to work at luxury resorts, and they can't even manage basic customer service. What's the point of paying resort prices if you're going to get motel-quality staff?" The lobby had gone almost completely quiet. Every guest within earshot was watching now, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to disgusted. A businessman in an expensive suit shook his head and muttered something to his companion about entitled jerks. A woman with 2 teenagers whispered, "That poor girl," while glaring at Chase with obvious contempt. But Clarissa, my daughter, whom I had raised to be better than this, just stood there scrolling through her phone like nothing was happening. That's when I understood that this weekend wasn't going to be about healing or bonding or rebuilding our relationship. This weekend was going to be a reckoning. Because in that moment, watching my son-in-law humiliate my employee while my daughter looked on with indifference, I finally saw them both clearly. And what I saw was going to change everything. Saturday morning dawned with a kind of perfect Key West weather that makes you understand why people dream of tropical escapes, crystal blue skies, gentle trade winds, and sunshine that feels like a personal blessing. I stood on my 7th-floor balcony, sipping coffee and watching the resort come to life below. Guests were already claiming poolside loungers, families were gathering for breakfast on the terrace, and the staff moved through it all with the kind of seamless efficiency that takes years to perfect. From this distance, everything looked peaceful and orderly. But I knew better now. I had spent most of the previous evening on the phone with David Chen, getting the full story of Chase and Clarissa's arrival. The scene I'd witnessed in the lobby was apparently just the opening act. He complained about everything, David had told me, his usually calm voice tight with controlled frustration. The water temperature in the shower, the thread count of the sheets, the view from their balcony. And every complaint was delivered like a personal attack on the staff member he was addressing. And Clarissa? She mostly stayed quiet, but David paused, choosing his words carefully. When housekeeping brought extra towels, she looked at the housekeeper like she was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Very dismissive. It was uncomfortable to watch. I thanked David and hung up feeling like I was mourning the daughter I thought I'd raised. Somewhere between private schools and trust funds, I'd failed to teach her the most important lesson of all, that every person deserves respect, regardless of their job or circumstances. Now, dressed in white linen pants and a silk blouse the color of seafoam, I prepared to face them both over breakfast. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, elegant but understated, expensive but not flashy. I wanted to look like a successful woman on vacation, not like someone trying to prove her wealth. The breakfast terrace was bustling when I arrived at 9 o'clock. I'd specifically chosen a time when I knew they'd be there. Chase was the type of man who treated resort breakfast buffets like personal kingdoms to be conquered, loading his plate high and demanding fresh everything. I spotted them immediately at a corner table with an ocean view. Chase was indeed at the buffet, piling scrambled eggs and bacon onto his plate while gesturing impatiently at the chef to flip his omelet faster. Clarissa sat at their table, looking stunning in a sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back in a style that showed off the diamond earrings I'd given her for her last birthday. She saw me first as I approached their table. "Mother," she said, standing to give me the kind of air kiss that was more performance than affection. You look lovely. As do you, darling. I replied, meaning it. Whatever else I could say about my daughter, she had inherited my eye for style and my instinct for making an entrance. Chase returned from the buffet with a plate that could have fed 3 people. Vivian, he said with false heartiness. Great to see you. Beautiful place you've got here. Thank you, I said, settling into the chair he'd half-heartedly pulled out for me. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Well, mostly, Chase said, cutting into his omelet with more force than necessary. Though I have to say, the service could use some improvement. The staff here seems a little undertrained. I felt my jaw tighten but kept my expression neutral. Oh, how so? Yesterday at check-in was a disaster, Chase said between bites. Some girl at the desk couldn't handle a simple room issue. Had to wait around for someone competent to fix it. Clarissa laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. You should have seen the look on that poor girl's face when Chase started explaining how customer service actually works. I thought she might cry. She probably should cry, Chase said, apparently finding this amusing. If you can't handle the pressure of working at a place like this, maybe you should find a job more suited to your capabilities. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. These were people I loved or had loved, talking about my employees, my staff, people who worked hard to make places like this possible, as if they were subhuman. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, I said quietly, regardless of their job. Chase paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Of course, he said with exaggerated patience, as if explaining something to a child. But respect has to be earned. And when you're paying premium prices, you expect premium service. That's just business. Is it? I asked. Because I've found that treating people well usually results in better service, not worse. That's very idealistic, Clarissa said, her tone suggesting that idealism was a character flaw. But in the real world, people need clear boundaries. They need to understand their place. Their place. As if human worth could be determined by job titles and paychecks. I was saved from responding by the arrival of our server, a young man named Marcus, whom I recognized from the staff files David had shown me. College student, working 2 jobs to pay for hospitality management degree, consistently rated as one of the guests' favorite staff members. Good morning, ladies, Marcus said with genuine warmth. Can I get you started with some coffee or juice? Coffee, please, I said, smiling at him. And thank you for taking care of us. My pleasure, ma'am. Chase barely looked up from his plate. Yeah, coffee. And make sure it's hot this time. Yesterday's was barely lukewarm. Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. I'll make sure you get a fresh pot, sir. As Marcus walked away, Chase shook his head. See what I mean? No initiative. I shouldn't have to tell him to bring hot coffee. That should be automatic. He seemed perfectly pleasant to me, I said. Pleasant doesn't pay the bills, Chase replied. These people need to understand that they're in the service industry. Their job is to anticipate what I need before I have to ask for it. I watched Marcus at the coffee station, carefully preparing our drinks with the kind of attention to detail that spoke to genuine pride in his work. When he returned to our table, he served each cup with a warm smile, even managing to maintain his professionalism despite Chase's obvious disdain. Is there anything else I can bring you ladies this morning? Marcus asked. I'm fine, thank you, I said. Actually, Chase interrupted, though Marcus hadn't addressed him. I ordered eggs Benedict 20 minutes ago. Where is it? Marcus looked confused. Sir, I don't show an order for eggs Benedict on my... I ordered it from the girl at the buffet, Chase said impatiently. Tall, blonde, probably new. Told her I wanted the hollandaise on the side, because you people never get the consistency right. I knew immediately what had happened. The girl at the buffet was Sarah, one of our breakfast servers, but she worked the buffet station, not the kitchen orders. She would have directed Chase to place his order through his table server, which would have been Marcus. Marcus, to his credit, didn't point out Chase's mistake. Instead, he said, "Let me check with the kitchen right away, sir. I'll have that out to you as quickly as possible." "You do that," Chase said dismissively, already turning back to his conversation with Clarissa about their plans for the day. As Marcus hurried away, I felt something crystallize inside me, a cold, hard certainty that this weekend was going to end very differently than any of us had planned. But I had no idea just how public that ending would be. After breakfast, I excused myself to make some business calls, leaving Chase and Clarissa to their day of resort activities. I spent the morning in my room, reviewing reports and answering emails, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation at breakfast. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of casual disrespect replayed in my head like a soundtrack of disappointment. Around 2 o'clock, I decided to take a walk through the resort. I told myself I was just getting some exercise and fresh air, but truthfully, I wanted to see more of how Chase and Clarissa interacted with my staff when they thought no one important was watching. I found them at the pool, installed in prime chaise loungers under a canvas cabana that provided perfect shade. Clarissa was reading a magazine while Chase worked on what appeared to be business emails on his phone. From a discreet distance, I watched as a pool attendant, Miguel, according to his name tag, approached their area with fresh towels and ice water. "Excuse me," Miguel said politely. "Would you like me to refresh your towels?" Chase looked up from his phone with obvious annoyance. "Finally, I flagged down someone 10 minutes ago asking for fresh drinks. Where are they?" Miguel looked confused. "Sir, I'm the towel attendant. For drinks, you would need to speak with." "I don't care what your official job is," Chase cut him off. "I'm a guest at this resort, and I asked for service. Either get me what I asked for, or find someone who can." "Of course, sir," Miguel said quickly. "What can I bring you?" "2 margaritas. Top-shelf tequila, not whatever cheap stuff you usually use. And make sure they're strong. Yesterday's were like fruit punch." Miguel nodded and hurried away toward the poolside bar. I watched him speak quickly with the bartender, explaining the situation. The bartender, Rose's nephew, if I remembered correctly, immediately started preparing the drinks while Miguel gathered fresh towels and continued his rounds. When Miguel returned with the margaritas, Chase took a sip and made a face. "This is what you call top shelf. Taste this," he said to Clarissa. She dutifully tried the drink. "It's fine, Chase." "It's not fine," Chase said loudly enough for other guests to hear. "Hey," he called to Miguel, who was arranging towels at a nearby chair. "These drinks are weak. Make them again, and this time actually put some alcohol in them." Miguel's face flushed, but he nodded. "Right away, sir." As Miguel walked away with the barely touched margaritas, I heard a woman at a nearby table whisper to her husband, "What a jerk. Those drinks looked perfectly fine to me." Her husband nodded in agreement. Some people think being on vacation means they can treat everyone like garbage. But Chase wasn't done. When Miguel returned with the remade drinks, Chase made a big show of tasting both of them before nodding grudgingly. "Better," he said. "But next time, don't make me ask twice." "Yes, sir," Miguel said quietly. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" "Not from you," Chase said dismissively, already turning back to his phone. I felt sick watching it. This wasn't just poor behavior, it was systematic humiliation of people who were just trying to do their jobs well. And through it all, Clarissa said nothing, did nothing, just absorbed it all as normal behavior. I was still processing what I'd witnessed when I saw them heading toward the lobby around 4 o'clock, their arms full of shopping bags from the resort boutiques. I followed at a distance, curious about what new display of entitlement I might witness. What I saw in the lobby that afternoon would change all of our lives forever. The lobby of the Sunset Bay Resort was busier than usual for a Saturday afternoon. A wedding party was checking in for a Sunday ceremony, their excitement filling the space with laughter and anticipation. Business travelers were arriving for a conference that would begin Monday morning. Families were returning from day trips to Key West, their children tired and sandy but happy. I positioned myself in one of the comfortable seating areas near the concierge desk, close enough to observe, but far enough away to remain unnoticed. I had a clear view of the front desk, where Jennifer Walsh was managing the controlled chaos with her usual professional grace. Chase and Clarissa approached the desk carrying several shopping bags, resort boutique purchases that probably cost more than some of my employees made in a week. I watched as they joined the line behind other guests, Chase checking his phone impatiently while Clarissa examined her manicure. Their turn came quickly. Jennifer greeted them with a warm smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, how can I help you this afternoon?" "We need someone to take these bags up to our room," Chase said without preamble, setting the shopping bags on the marble counter. "And I want to confirm our late checkout tomorrow. We don't want to be rushed." "Of course," Jennifer said. "I'll have a bellhop bring your purchases up right away. And I can confirm your checkout time. You're set for 2 p.m. tomorrow, correct?" "Make it 3 p.m., Chase said. "We might want to use the pool in the morning." "I'll make that adjustment," Jennifer said, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" That's when I saw myself approaching the front desk. I'd been so focused on watching Chase and Clarissa that I hadn't noticed my own approach from the other direction. I was carrying my laptop bag and a small overnight case. I decided to move to a different room for the final night of their stay, wanting some distance from the toxicity I'd witnessed all weekend. I joined the line behind an elderly gentleman who was asking questions about transportation to the airport. Chase and Clarissa were still at the counter, chatting with Jennifer about restaurant recommendations for dinner. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. As the elderly gentleman finished his transaction and moved away, I stepped forward to the counter. Jennifer saw me immediately, her face lighting up with recognition. But before she could speak, Chase turned around, probably to gather their shopping bags, and nearly collided with me. "Excuse me," I said politely, steadying myself. Chase looked me up and down, taking in my simple linen dress, my laptop bag, my single piece of luggage. His expression shifted from mild irritation to something much uglier. "Well, well," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the busy lobby. "Look who it is." Clarissa turned to see what had caught her husband's attention. When she saw me, her face broke into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mother, what a coincidence." But Chase wasn't done. He looked at Jennifer, who was standing behind the counter looking increasingly uncomfortable, and then back at me. "You know what? Don't bother helping her," he said, his voice getting louder. "She's just a maid. Let her carry her own bags." The words hit the lobby like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned in our direction. The elegant atmosphere of the resort lobby suddenly felt charged with tension. "Chase," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "What did you just say?" But Chase was on a roll now, energized by what he clearly thought was his moment of dominance. He turned to address Jennifer directly, his voice loud enough for everyone within 30 feet to hear. "I said don't help her with the bags. She's just a maid." He gestured at me dismissively. "Probably here cleaning rooms or something. Let her handle her own luggage. That's what they're paid for, right?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, could sense the wedding party guests exchanging shocked glances, could see other hotel guests reaching for their phones. This wasn't just a private family humiliation. This was becoming a very public spectacle. And then Clarissa, my daughter, my only child, the little girl I had worked 18-hour days to provide for, burst out laughing. It wasn't a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable giggle. It was genuine amusement, as if her husband had just told the most hilarious joke she'd ever heard. "Oh my God, Chase," she said between giggles. "You're terrible. But you're not wrong. She does look like she belongs downstairs with the cleaning supplies, doesn't she?" The lobby had gone completely silent now. Even the children had stopped chattering. I could hear the distant sound of steel drums from the pool area, the gentle whoosh of the air conditioning, the soft lap of waves on the beach outside. But in our immediate vicinity, the silence was absolute. Jennifer looked like she was about to be physically ill. Her face had gone pale, and she was gripping the edge of the marble counter so hard her knuckles were white. I could see her struggling between her professional training, never contradict a guest, always maintain composure, and her obvious desire to defend me. The elderly businessman who had been in line behind us stepped closer. "Excuse me," he said to Chase, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years in corporate boardrooms. "That's completely inappropriate. You owe this lady an apology." Chase turned on him with a sneer. "Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you." "Actually," said a woman in her 50s who had been checking in with her husband, "it concerns all of us. We're all witnessing you humiliate another human being for no reason." More voices joined in. "That's disgusting behavior. Someone should call security. How can you talk to another person like that?" But Chase seemed to feed off the attention. He puffed up his chest and addressed the growing crowd like he was holding court. "Look, I don't know what kind of bleeding heart liberal nonsense you people subscribe to, but I'm a paying guest at a luxury resort. I have every right to expect that the staff knows their place and the guests are treated with appropriate respect. This woman," he pointed at me like I was an exhibit in a museum, "clearly doesn't belong in the same line as paying customers." That's when I felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap. Like a steel cable under too much tension, like a branch in a hurricane, like the last thread holding a dam together before it bursts. I had built my empire on patience, on strategy, on carefully calculated moves that always put me 3 steps ahead of my competition. But standing there in the lobby of my own hotel, listening to my daughter laugh at her husband's cruelty, watching my employees struggle with the impossible position they'd been put in, I abandoned strategy altogether. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small plastic card. It was black, with gold lettering, and completely unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it represented. I walked calmly to the front desk, where Jennifer was still standing frozen, and placed the card on the marble counter. "Jennifer," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent lobby, "would you mind scanning this for me?" Jennifer looked down at the card, and I watched as recognition dawned in her eyes. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. "Ms. LaRoche," she whispered. "Please," I said calmly, "scan the card." With trembling hands, Jennifer picked up the card and ran it through the reader at her station. The computer screen changed immediately, displaying information that made her eyes widen further. "What's going on?" Chase demanded, his voice less certain now. "What is that card?" I turned to face him, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. "This card," I said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, "identifies me as the owner of this resort, and of the other 47 properties in the LaRoche Luxury Hotels chain." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of people witnessing bad behavior. This was the stunned silence of people watching a bomb go off. Chase's face cycled through several colors, red to white to an interesting shade of green. Clarissa had stopped laughing, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of shock. "You're lying," Chase said, but his voice cracked on the words. I turned back to Jennifer, who was staring at her computer screen like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Jennifer," I said pleasantly, "could you please read aloud what it says on your screen?" Jennifer cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. It says Vivian LaRoche, owner and CEO, LaRoche Luxury Hotels. Access level, unlimited. Special instructions, notified general manager immediately upon arrival. A murmur ran through the crowd of onlookers. I heard someone whisper, "Holy shit, she owns this place." Another voice, "Did you get that on video?" I walked closer to Chase, who was backing away from the front desk like I was carrying a contagious disease. "You called me a maid," I said, my voice perfectly calm and conversational. "And you know what? You're absolutely right." Chase looked confused, like he couldn't process what was happening. "I was a maid," I continued, stepping closer. "I started as a 19-year-old girl cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors. I worked 16-hour days, came home with bleeding hands, and lived in a studio apartment with no heat. But you know what I learned during those years?" Chase opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I learned that every job has dignity. I learned that the people who clean your rooms and serve your food and carry your bags are human beings who deserve respect. And I learned that the measure of a person isn't what they do for a living, it's how they treat other people." The crowd around us had grown. Hotel guests were abandoning their check-ins to watch the drama unfold. I could see phones out, recording everything. In a few hours, this would be all over social media. I also learned, I continued, my voice getting harder, that some people mistake kindness for weakness. That some people think money gives them the right to treat others as less than human. And that some people need to be reminded that actions have consequences. I turned to Jennifer, who was watching the scene with fascination and horror. "Jennifer, please cancel Mr. and Mrs. Morgan's reservation. Effective immediately." "Wait," Chase sputtered, finally finding his voice. "Wait, you can't." "I can and I am," I said, cutting him off. "You see, as the owner of this establishment, I have the right to refuse service to anyone who treats my staff with disrespect. And what you've done here today, humiliating my employees, disrupting my lobby, creating a hostile environment for other guests, that's more than enough grounds for immediate removal." Clarissa stepped forward, her face pale. "Mother, please, we can talk about this." "We could have talked about it," I said, turning to face my daughter. "We could have talked about it at breakfast when you laughed about making a staff member cry. We could have talked about it at the pool when you sat silently while your husband berated a young man just trying to do his job. We could have talked about it any number of times over the past 3 years when you've shown nothing but contempt for people whose only crime is working for a living." Tears were starting to form in Clarissa's eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Not anymore." "But we didn't talk about it," I continued. "Instead, you came to my hotel, humiliated my employees, and then stood in my lobby and laughed while your husband called me a maid like it was the most insulting thing he could think of." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. The irony, of course, is that being called a maid isn't an insult. Maids work hard, take pride in their jobs, and contribute something valuable to the world. Unlike entitled parasites who think their trust funds make them better than everyone else. The crowd around us had grown to include most of the people in the lobby. I could see David Chin pushing through the crowd, probably having been alerted by Jennifer's scan of my access card. His face was a mixture of concern and fascination as he took in the scene. "David," I called to him, "please have security escort Mr. and Mrs. Morgan from the premises immediately. Their belongings should be packed and waiting for them at the front entrance." "Yes, ma'am," David said, pulling out his radio. "This is insane," Chase said, his voice rising to near hysteria. "You can't throw paying guests out of a hotel because of a misunderstanding." "This wasn't the misunderstanding," I said. "This was a choice. You chose to humiliate people who couldn't defend themselves. You chose to treat my staff like they were subhuman. You chose to turn my lobby into a circus for your own amusement." 2 security guards were approaching now, their expressions professional but determined. "Every choice has consequences," I continued. "And here are yours." The security guards who approached us were professionals, calm, courteous, but unmistakably serious about their job. The larger of the two, a man I recognized as Thomas Mitchell from his personnel file, spoke first. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," he said politely but firmly, "we're going to need you to come with us." Chase's face had gone through several color changes and finally settled on an alarming shade of purple. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm a paying guest at this hotel, and I demand to speak to someone in management." "Sir," Thomas said patiently, "you are speaking to management. Ms. LaRoche is the owner of this property." "I don't care if she's the Queen of England," Chase shot back. "This is America. You can't just throw people out of a hotel because you don't like them." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through his protests like ice. "Actually, I can. This is private property, and as the owner, I have the absolute right to refuse service to anyone who creates a disturbance, harasses my staff, or makes other guests uncomfortable. You've managed to do all three in the span of 10 minutes. The crowd around us had swelled to include nearly everyone in the lobby. Hotel guests had abandoned their check-ins to watch the drama unfold. I could see phones everywhere, recording every word, every gesture. By tomorrow morning, this would be viral. Clarissa grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Mother, please," she whispered urgently. "People are filming this. Think about your reputation, the business." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. "My reputation?" I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My reputation is built on treating people with dignity and respect. It's built on creating places where families can make memories, where staff can take pride in their work, where everyone, regardless of their bank account, feels welcome." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "Your husband just destroyed any chance I had of maintaining that reputation by making a scene that will be talked about for months. The only question now is whether people remember me as the owner who allowed her family to abuse her staff, or as the owner who stood up for her employees when it mattered." David Chen had positioned himself near the front desk, quietly coordinating with Jennifer to manage the crowd and the logistics of what was clearly going to be a very public ejection. I caught his eye and nodded slightly. "Proceed as planned." "Ms. LaRoche," Thomas said, "their belongings are being packed now. Should we escort them to their room to supervise?" "No," I said firmly. "I want them out of the building immediately. Their belongings can be brought to the front entrance." Chase lunged forward, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You can't keep our things hostage. That's theft. Your belongings will be returned to you in full." I replied calmly. "You're welcome to inspect everything before you leave, but you will not be returning to that room." That's when Clarissa tried a different approach. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Mother, I know you're upset, but please think about this rationally. Chase was trying to be funny. You know how men can be when they're showing off. He didn't mean anything by it." I stared at my daughter, really looked at her, and felt something die inside me that I hadn't even realized was still alive. Hope, maybe, or the last remnant of unconditional love. "He didn't mean anything by it," I repeated slowly. "He publicly humiliated me in front of dozens of people, called me names, instructed my staff not to serve me, and turned my lobby into his personal entertainment venue. And you think he didn't mean anything by it?" "You're overreacting," Clarissa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I turned to address the crowd that had gathered around us. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry for the disruption to your day, but I have a question for you." The lobby fell silent again, all eyes on me. "How many of you recorded what happened here? How many of you have video of my son-in-law calling me a maid and telling the staff not to serve me?" Dozens of hands went up. Phones were held high, their screens showing the now familiar sight of Chase's sneering face and Clarissa's laughter. And how many of you think that behavior was acceptable? That it was just a man being funny or showing off? Not a single hand stayed raised. The silence was damning. I turned back to Clarissa. There's your answer. The elevator dinged, and 3 housekeeping staff members emerged with luggage carts loaded with suitcases, shopping bags, and personal items. I recognized Isabella, one of our senior housekeepers, leading the group. She approached David Chun and spoke quietly with him before he nodded and walked over to me. Their belongings are ready, he said. Everything has been carefully packed and accounted for. Excellent, I said. Then, raising my voice so everyone could hear, I added, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, your things are here. Thomas will escort you to the front entrance, where you can verify that everything is present and accounted for. Chase looked like he was about to have a stroke. This is kidnapping. False imprisonment. I'm calling the police. Please do, I said pleasantly. I'll be happy to explain to them how you disrupted my business, harassed my employees, and created a public disturbance. I have about 50 witnesses and multiple video recordings to support my case. Thomas stepped forward. Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. But you are leaving this property. Now. For a moment, I thought Chase might actually try to fight. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw worked like he was chewing on something tough, and I could see him calculating his options. But even in his rage, he wasn't completely stupid. 2 security guards, dozens of witnesses, and video evidence of his behavior didn't add up to a winning confrontation. Fine, he snarled. But this isn't over. I'll sue you for everything you've got. I'll destroy your business. I'll make sure everyone knows what a vindictive bitch you really are. The crowd gasped audibly. Several people shook their heads in disgust. I heard someone mutter, "What an asshole." I smiled at Chase with a kind of cold pleasantness that had struck fear into the hearts of competitors across 3 continents. Mr. Morgan, I said, I own 48 hotels in 12 countries. My net worth is approximately $800 million. I employ over 15,000 people, and my annual revenue exceeds $2 billion. I paused, letting those numbers sink in. You, on the other hand, are a mid-level investment banker whose biggest achievement is marrying into money. If you want to go to war with me, please understand that you're bringing a water pistol to a nuclear fight. The lobby erupted in applause. Actual applause, like I just delivered the closing argument in a murder trial. Guests clapped, whistled, and several people shouted, "Yes, and you tell him." Chase's face went white, then red, then white again. He looked around at the crowd, probably just realizing for the first time that he wasn't the hero of this story. "Come on, Clarissa," he muttered, grabbing her arm. "We're leaving." But Clarissa pulled away from him. For a moment, I thought she might be coming to her senses, might be ready to apologize and try to rebuild what we'd lost. Instead, she looked at me with pure venom in her eyes. "You think you're so superior," she hissed, "but all the money in the world can't change what you really are. You're still just a maid from Boston who got lucky. And everyone sees right through you." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But not in the way she intended. They didn't hurt because they were true, they hurt because they showed me exactly what my daughter had become. "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "I am still a maid from Boston. I'm still the woman who cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors and learned that honest work has dignity. I'm still the woman who built something from nothing, who created jobs for thousands of people, who turned that maid's work ethic into an empire." I stepped closer to her, and she actually backed away. "The difference between us, Clarissa, is that I remember where I came from. I remember what it's like to be dismissed, to be treated as invisible, to have people look through you like you don't matter. And instead of becoming someone who treats others that way, I became someone who makes sure it never happens to anyone in my employ. I gestured around the lobby, at the staff members who were watching with obvious admiration, at the guests who were nodding in approval. You call me just a maid like it's an insult, I continued. But everyone here sees the truth. They see a woman who stands up for her employees. They see someone who won't tolerate cruelty or disrespect. They see strength, not weakness. The applause started again, louder this time. I heard someone shout, "That's how you do it." Another voice, "Respect." Clarissa's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. "I hate you," she screamed. "I hate everything about you. You ruined my childhood with your obsession with these stupid hotels, and now you're ruining my marriage because you can't stand to see me happy." The lobby fell silent again. This was raw family drama now, the kind of pain that makes strangers look away in discomfort. "I'm not ruining your marriage, Clarissa," I said quietly. "Your husband's behavior is doing that all by itself. The question is whether you're going to enable it or recognize it for what it is." "He's a good man," she sobbed. "He loves me. He just doesn't understand how to deal with people like—" She gestured vaguely at the staff members around us. "People like what?" I asked. "People who work for a living? People who serve others? People who take pride in honest labor?" Clarissa didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her silence said everything. Thomas cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we really need to move this along. The front entrance is getting crowded, and we have other guests trying to check in." I nodded. The show was over. The point had been made. Now it was time for the final act. "Of course," I said. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Morgan to the front entrance. Make sure they have all their belongings, and then see them safely off the property." As the security guards moved to flank Chase and Clarissa, I added one final instruction. "Oh, and Thomas? Mr. and Mrs. Morgan are permanently banned from all LaRoche luxury properties worldwide. Please make sure that information is added to our system immediately." Chase spun around one last time. "You crazy bitch. You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the lobby, "is that it took me this long to see who you both really are." As they were escorted toward the exit, the crowd began to disperse, but slowly. People were still talking, still recording, still processing what they'd witnessed. Several guests approached me to express their support, to tell me how impressed they were with how I'd handled the situation. But I barely heard them. I was watching my daughter walk out of my life, probably forever, and feeling the complex mixture of grief and relief that comes with finally accepting an unacceptable truth. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. And sometimes that's exactly as it should be. The front entrance of the Sunset Bay Resort was designed to make arrivals feel special. A circular drive lined with royal palms, a magnificent fountain in the center, and a covered portico where guests could exit their vehicles in shade and comfort. It was meant to be a place of welcome and luxury. As I watched from the lobby windows, it became something else entirely, a stage for the final act of Chase and Clarissa's humiliation. Word had spread quickly through the resort. Guests who hadn't witnessed the lobby confrontation had heard about it from others, and now they were gathering on balconies, around the pool area, and near the windows to watch the exit proceedings. It was like a reality show playing out in real time. Thomas and his partner, Marcus Rodriguez, flanked Chase and Clarissa as they emerged from the lobby. Behind them, Isabella and two other housekeeping staff members wheeled out carts loaded with their belongings. The scene would have been perfectly ordinary, guests departing with their luggage, except for the crowd of onlookers and the obvious tension radiating from the central figures. I had positioned myself in the lobby where I could observe through the floor-to-ceiling windows while still being inside the air-conditioned comfort of my hotel. David Chin stood beside me, along with Jennifer and several other staff members who had been involved in the incident. "Ma'am," David said quietly, "the local news station has been calling. Apparently, someone sent them video from the lobby." I wasn't surprised. In today's world, nothing stays private for long, especially when it's as dramatic as what had just unfolded. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That we don't comment on the private matters of our guests," David replied. "But they're asking if they can come out for an interview." I considered this. The story was going to break, whether I participated or not. At least if I controlled the narrative, I could ensure it focused on the right message. "Schedule something for later this evening," I decided, after our current guests have had time to enjoy their dinner without media disruption. Through the window, I watched Chase inspect the luggage carts with obvious frustration. He was clearly looking for some reason to complain, some excuse to create another scene, but Isabella had done her job with typical professionalism. Every item was carefully packed, every belonging accounted for. Clarissa stood apart from her husband, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm Florida evening. She looked lost, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening to her. For a moment, seeing her like that, I felt a familiar tug of maternal instinct. Then I remembered the sound of her laughter echoing through the lobby. "Their taxi is here," Marcus announced through his radio. A yellow cab had pulled up to the portico, and the driver was getting out to help with the luggage. I recognized him. It was Carlos, the same driver who had brought me to the resort yesterday and spoken so warmly about his sister Rosa. This was going to be interesting. Chase immediately took charge of the luggage transfer, apparently not trusting the housekeeping staff to handle his designer suitcases properly. He grabbed the most expensive pieces himself, muttering complaints that I couldn't hear but could certainly imagine. Carlos, meanwhile, was trying to fit their considerable amount of luggage into his taxi's trunk and back seat. The shopping bags from the resort boutiques presented a particular challenge. They contained fragile items that couldn't be compressed or stacked carelessly. "This isn't going to work," I heard Chase say, his voice carrying clearly across the portico. "We have too much stuff for this piece of junk." Carlos looked up from his careful arrangement of their belongings. "Sir, I can make it work. I just need to." "I don't want you to make it work," Chase snapped. "I want a proper car. A real car. Not this taxi cab nonsense." "Chase," Clarissa said quietly, "it's fine. Let's just go." But Chase was on another one of his rolls. The humiliation of being ejected from the hotel seemed to be transforming into anger at everyone around him, and Carlos had become a convenient target. "Do you know how much money I spent at this resort?" Chase demanded, as if Carlos was somehow responsible for their situation. I should be leaving in a limo, not cramming into some beat-up taxi that probably hasn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. Carlos continued packing their luggage, his movements careful and professional despite the insults. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that spoke of a man controlling his temper through long practice. "Sir," Carlos said diplomatically, "I promise you'll be comfortable. I keep my cab very clean and—" "I don't care about your promises," Chase interrupted. "I care about getting what I paid for. And what I paid for was luxury service, not a ride in some immigrant's piece-of-shit taxi." The words hit the portico like a physical blow. Several guests who had been watching from nearby visibly recoiled. An elderly woman actually gasped audibly. Thomas took a step closer to Chase, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. But it was Carlos's reaction that broke my heart. The proud, friendly man who had told me about his sister Rosa, who had spoken with such warmth about his granddaughters Quinceanera, who had called me lady, with such genuine respect, that man's shoulders sagged. His face, weathered by years of Florida sun and honest work, crumpled slightly before he caught himself and forced it back into professional neutrality. "Yes, sir," Carlos said quietly, continuing to load their luggage. "I understand." That's when I stopped being a hotel owner managing a difficult situation and became, once again, the 19-year-old maid who'd been treated like dirt for the crime of working for a living. I walked out of the lobby and across the portico, my heels clicking against the polished concrete. The crowd of onlookers seemed to sense that the drama wasn't over. Phones came out again, conversations died down. All attention focused on my approach. "Carlos," I called out, my voice carrying clearly in the evening air. He looked up, recognizing me immediately. "Oh, hello again, lady. Didn't expect to see you so soon." "I didn't expect to see you either," I said, walking directly to his taxi. "But I'm very glad you're here." Chase, who had been mid-rant about the inadequacy of the luggage space, fell silent. Clarissa looked up from her phone, probably sensing that whatever was about to happen wouldn't be good for them. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling quickly to find what I was looking for. When I found it, I showed the screen to Carlos. "Carlos," I said, "yesterday you told me about your sister Rosa, who works in housekeeping. You said she works for someone named LaRoche, who treats her employees well." Carlos nodded, clearly confused about where this was going. "Yes, ma'am. My sister. She loves working for that lady. Says she's the best boss she ever had." "Well," I said, smiling at him, "it turns out I'm that lady." Carlos's eyes widened. He looked from my phone screen, which showed my company biography and photo, back to my face, then back to the phone. You're the LaRoche lady? The one who owns all the hotels." "I am," I confirmed. "And Rosa is a wonderful employee. You should be very proud of her. She always talks about how good you are to the people who work for you." I turned to face Chase, who was standing frozen beside the taxi, clearly trying to process what he was hearing. "Mr. Morgan," I said pleasantly, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Carlos here. You seem to have some concerns about his taxi." Chase's face went through several color changes. I was just... You were just expressing your opinion about immigrant workers and their piece-of-shit taxis," I said, my voice carrying clearly to the growing crowd of onlookers. In front of my hotel, to a man whose sister has worked for me for 15 years. The silence was deafening. Even the distant sound of steel drums seemed to have stopped. I walked closer to Carlos, who was standing very still, probably trying to understand how his simple taxi pickup had turned into this moment. "Carlos," I said, "you don't have to take these passengers if you don't want to. I can call another taxi for them." Carlos looked at me, then at Chase, then back at me. I could see him weighing his options, the money from the fare versus his dignity, the practical need to work versus the insult he'd just endured. "Ma'am," Carlos said finally, "I'll take them. It's my job." "It is your job," I agreed. "But it's not your job to be insulted while you do it." I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. From it, I extracted 5 $100 bills and handed them to Carlos. "This is for the excellent service you provided when you drove me here yesterday," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And for the excellent service I know you'll provide to Mr. and Mrs. Morgan today, despite their attitude." Carlos stared at the money in his hand like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "Ma'am, this is too much. The fare is only..." "The fare is whatever I say it is," I interrupted gently. "And I say exceptional service deserves exceptional compensation." I turned to address the crowd that had gathered, including several hotel guests who were recording everything on their phones. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying across the portico, "I want you to meet Carlos. He's been driving taxi in Key West for over 20 years. He supports his family through honest work, pays his taxes, and takes pride in providing good service to his customers. His sister Rosa has been one of my finest employees for 15 years. I gestured toward Chase and Clarissa, who were both staring at the ground like they wanted to disappear entirely. These are the people that Mr. Morgan just called inferior because of their immigration status and their choice of profession. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I heard someone say, "That's disgusting." Another voice, "What's wrong with people?" Carlos was still staring at the money in his hand, but now tears were forming in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't know what this means. My granddaughter's quinceañera is next month, and we've been trying to save up for her dress." "Then I hope she finds the perfect one," I said, squeezing his shoulder gently. That's when the skies opened up. Florida afternoon thunderstorms are legendary for their sudden intensity, and this one was no exception. What had been a clear evening sky suddenly erupted in a deluge that sent everyone scrambling for cover. Everyone except Chase and Clarissa, who were caught in the open portico with their luggage scattered around Carlos's taxi. The covered area provided some protection, but the wind was driving the rain sideways, soaking anyone who wasn't pressed back against the building. Hotel guests retreated into the lobby or ran for their cars. Staff members who had been working outside sought shelter under awnings and overhangs. But Chase and Clarissa had nowhere to go except into Carlos's taxi. "Come on," Chase shouted over the sound of the rain, grabbing suitcases and shoving them into the trunk. "We need to get out of here." Carlos, professional to the end despite everything that had happened, helped them load the remaining luggage as quickly as possible. Water streamed from his hair and soaked through his shirt, but he never stopped working. Within minutes, they were all crammed into the taxi with their hastily packed belongings. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see Chase's face, red with anger and humiliation. Clarissa sat in the back seat, her designer dress rumpled, her hair disheveled, looking like she might cry. As the taxi pulled away from the portico, I heard its engine sputtering slightly, probably not helped by the sudden downpour. They disappeared into the storm, heading toward whatever cheap motel would take them for the night. I stood under the covered portico, completely dry, watching their taillights disappear into the rain.
"Mom?"
David Chin appeared beside me, holding an umbrella. "The news crew is here. Are you ready for that interview?" I looked out at the storm, then back at my beautiful resort, filled with guests who were probably telling this story to everyone they knew. "Yes," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm ready." Because sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do in private, it's what you're willing to stand behind in public. The interview with Channel 7 News took place in the resort's elegant library, a quiet space lined with mahogany bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs that provided the perfect backdrop for serious conversation. The reporter, Maria Santos, was a seasoned journalist who had covered everything from hurricane disasters to political scandals, and she approached the story with the kind of professional intensity that told me this wasn't going to be a puff piece. "Ms. LaRoche," she began once the cameras were rolling, "can you walk us through what happened in your hotel lobby this afternoon?" I had spent the hour since the interview was scheduled thinking about how to frame the story. I could have spun it as a family dispute, minimized the incident, or refused to comment entirely. Instead, I chose to tell the truth. A guest at my resort publicly humiliated me and instructed my staff not to provide me with service because he assumed I was a maid, I said calmly. When I revealed that I was actually the owner of the property, I made the decision to terminate his stay immediately. "And this guest was your son-in-law?"
"Yes."
"Along with my daughter, who found his behavior amusing rather than appalling." Maria leaned forward slightly. "That must have been incredibly painful for you personally." "It was," I admitted. "But it was more painful to watch my employees being treated with such disrespect. These are people who work hard to make our guests comfortable, who take pride in their jobs, who deserve to be treated with basic human dignity." That's non-negotiable at any LaRoche property. Some people might say you overreacted. That family dynamics shouldn't affect business decisions. I had been expecting this question. Maria, would you tolerate someone in your workplace who publicly humiliated your colleagues? Who created a hostile environment for other people trying to do their jobs? Family relationship or not, behavior has consequences. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from my background as a former housekeeper to my philosophy about employee treatment to the viral nature of the incident. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, I felt like I had told the story I wanted to tell, one about respect, dignity, and standing up for people who can't always stand up for themselves. But I had no idea how big this story was about to become. The Channel 7 report aired at 11 p.m. that night, and by midnight, it had been picked up by 3 other Florida news stations. By 6 a.m. the next morning, it was trending on Twitter under the hashtags #MaidBoss, #YouCan'tStayHere, and #RespectWorkers. By noon, it had been shared over 100,000 times across all social media platforms. The video footage from the hotel guests' phones provided multiple angles of the confrontation, creating a complete picture that left no room for misinterpretation. Chase's sneer as he called me just a maid. Clarissa's delighted laughter. My calm revelation of who I really was. The shocked silence that followed. The security escort to the door. But it wasn't just the drama that captured people's attention. It was the larger message about how we treat service workers, about dignity in all forms of honest labor, about standing up to bullies regardless of their relationship to you. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My corporate office in Manhattan started fielding interview requests from national media outlets within hours. CNN wanted to do a segment on workplace dignity. The Today Show requested a live interview. The Wall Street Journal wanted to write a feature about my business philosophy and how the incident reflected my management style. But more importantly, the bookings started pouring in. Ma'am, David Chin told me over the phone Monday morning, we're completely booked for the next 3 months. And it's not just Sunset Bay. Properties across the entire chain are seeing unprecedented reservation requests. People are specifically asking to stay at the hotel where the owner stood up for her employees. I was back in Manhattan by then, sitting in my corner office and watching the story unfold across every major news platform. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While Chase and Clarissa were presumably hiding from the media attention, I was fielding congratulations from business leaders, politicians, and celebrities who appreciated the stand I had taken. But the most meaningful responses came from people like Carlos's sister Rosa. She appeared on my office schedule Tuesday afternoon, having taken the bus up from Boston to see me in person. Jennifer Walsh, my executive assistant, escorted her into my office, and I could immediately see the family resemblance. The same kind eyes, the same proud bearing despite obvious nervousness. Ms. LaRoche, Rosa said, standing awkwardly in front of my desk. I hope it's okay that I came. I know you're very busy. Rosa, I said, standing up and walking around my desk to embrace her. You are never too busy for.
Please sit down.
Can I get you some coffee? Something to eat. She accepted coffee and settled into one of the leather chairs facing my desk. I saw the news, she said simply. I saw what my brother Carlos told the reporters about me, about how you treat your employees. I wanted to thank you. You don't need to thank me for treating you fairly, I said. That's just basic human decency. Maybe to you, Rosa said, her voice getting stronger, but not to everyone. I worked hotels for 30 years before I came to LaRoche. I was invisible to most owners. Just another brown woman cleaning their toilets. You see me as a person. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. My granddaughter, Carlos's granddaughter, she wanted you to have this. She made it herself. Inside the wrapping was a small ceramic figurine of a woman in a business suit, painted carefully in bright colors. At the base, in a child's handwriting, were the words, Thank you for helping my family. I felt tears prick my eyes as I examined the little figure. This is beautiful, Rosa. Please tell her I'll treasure it. She wants to be a businesswoman like you when she grows up, Rosa said proudly. She says she wants to own hotels and take care of people the way you do. After Rosa left, I sat in my office holding that little figurine and thinking about legacy, not the financial empire I'd built, but the example I was setting for the next generation. A little girl in Key West now believed that success meant taking care of people, not looking down on them. That afternoon brought a different kind of visitor. Ms. LaRoche, Jennifer's voice came through my intercom. There's a Mr. Bradley Morrison here to see you. He says he works for your son-in-law. I frowned. I didn't recognize the name, but the connection to Chase was intriguing. Send him in. Bradley Morrison turned out to be a well-dressed man in his 40s with a kind of nervous energy that suggested he was delivering news he'd rather not be sharing. He introduced himself as a senior partner at Chase's investment firm. Ms. LaRoche, he said after accepting my offer of a seat, I want to start by saying that what happened at your resort was completely unacceptable. Chase's behavior was inexcusable, and it doesn't reflect the values of our firm. I appreciate that, I said carefully, sensing there was more coming. Unfortunately, Bradley continued, the video of the incident has created some complications for us professionally. Several of our major clients have expressed concerns about being associated with someone who treats service workers the way Chase did. We've lost 2 significant accounts since Monday. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was fascinated. I hadn't expected the professional consequences to manifest this quickly. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I wasn't sorry at all. The partners have met, Bradley said, clearly uncomfortable, and we've decided that it would be best for everyone if Chase pursued other opportunities. We're prepared to offer him a generous severance package, but his employment with us is being terminated effective immediately. So Chase had lost his job. The man who had publicly humiliated me for being just a maid was now unemployed because of his own behavior. The irony was exquisite. That must be a difficult decision for your firm, I said diplomatically. It is, Bradley agreed. Chase's was a competent analyst. But competence doesn't excuse character flaws, and our clients expect better from the people who handle their investments. After Bradley left, I found myself thinking about the ripple effects of that single moment in my hotel lobby. Chase had lost his job. Clarissa was probably dealing with the social embarrassment of being married to the man in the viral video. Their names were now permanently associated with entitled, abusive behavior. Meanwhile, my business was booming, my employees felt supported and valued, and I was being held up as an example of principled leadership. But the most satisfying development came Thursday afternoon, in the form of a phone call from my lawyer, Patricia Webb. Vivian, Patricia said, her voice carrying a tone of professional satisfaction, I have some interesting news about your son-in-law's threats to sue you. Oh, I had almost forgotten about Chase's promise to destroy my business through litigation. He hired Davies, Morrison and Associates, that white shoe firm that handles rich boys who get themselves in trouble. Expensive lawyers for expensive problems. And they dropped him as a client yesterday. Apparently, they reviewed the video evidence and advised him that not only does he have no case against you, but pursuing litigation would only draw more negative attention to his behavior. They were quite firm that he should let the matter drop. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. So, he can't even find lawyers willing to take his money? Oh, it gets better, Patricia continued. Word is spreading through the legal community about what he tried to do. Most of the major firms in New York won't touch him now. They're afraid of being associated with his reputation. By Friday afternoon, the story had been covered by every major news outlet in the country. I had appeared on 3 morning shows, given interviews to 2 national magazines, and been invited to speak at a conference on workplace dignity. But the most satisfying moment came when David Chin called with the week's final update. "Ma'am," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "I thought you'd want to know. We just got a group booking from the International Hotel Workers Union. They want to hold their annual convention at Sunset Bay next year. They specifically requested our property because, and I quote, La Roche Hotels shows that successful businesses can be built on treating workers with respect." That evening, I stood in my penthouse apartment looking out over Manhattan, holding Rose's granddaughter's ceramic figurine and thinking about the events of the past week. In trying to humiliate me, Chase and Clarissa had inadvertently created a platform for me to demonstrate my values on a national stage. Their cruelty had become my opportunity to show the world what real strength looks like. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Clarissa, finally ready to apologize. Instead, it was from Carlos. "Lady, my granddaughter got her quinceañera dress today. It's the most beautiful thing you ever seen. Rosa says to tell you we're naming you godmother in our hearts. Thank you for everything." I set down my phone and smiled, looking out at the city lights. Some victories are measured in stock prices and revenue reports. Others are measured in the gratitude of good people who've been treated with the respect they deserved all along. This had definitely been the second kind. 3 months later, as autumn painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and crimson, I made a decision that would either provide closure to the most painful chapter of my life or open new wounds I wasn't sure I could heal from. I was going to invite Chase and Clarissa to dinner. The decision came to me while reviewing quarterly reports in my office. The numbers were extraordinary, the best 3 months in La Roche Hotel's history. The Sunset Bay incident, as my marketing team had dubbed it, had generated over $50 million in new bookings across our properties. Business magazines were calling it a masterclass in values-based marketing, though I'd never intended it as marketing at all. But success, I'd learned long ago, means nothing if you have no one to share it with. And despite everything that had happened, Clarissa was still my daughter. "Jennifer," I called through the intercom, "please get me Clarissa's address. I'd like to send her an invitation." There was a pause. Jennifer Walsh had been with me for 8 years and had never questioned my decisions, but I could sense her concern. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "are you sure that's wise? After everything that's happened?" "Probably not," I admitted. "But sometimes unwise decisions are the only ones worth making." The invitation was formal, engraved on heavy cream cardstock with my personal monogram. I wrote it myself, rather than having Jennifer draft it. "Clarissa and Chase, I would be honored if you would join me for dinner at my home on Saturday, October 15th, at 7 o'clock. I know our last meeting was difficult, but you're still my family, and family deserves another chance. Please let me know if you can attend. With love and hope, Mother." I had the invitation hand-delivered to their apartment on the Upper East Side, a wedding gift from me that they'd never properly thanked me for. The building's doorman, a distinguished gentleman named Patrick whom I'd known for years, promised to ensure it reached them personally. "It's good to see you reaching out to your daughter, Ms. La Roche," Patrick said as I handed him the envelope. "Family's important, even when they disappoint us." The response came 2 days later, also hand-delivered. Clarissa's handwriting was as elegant as ever, but I could sense the uncertainty beneath the careful script. "Mother, Chase and I would be pleased to accept your invitation. We've been hoping for a chance to clarify some misunderstandings from our last meeting. We'll see you Saturday at 7. Clarissa." No love in her closing, I noticed. No acknowledgement of the pain we'd all experienced. Just formal acceptance and a suggestion that what had happened in Key West was somehow a misunderstanding rather than a revelation of character. But it was a start. I spent the week before the dinner carefully planning every detail. This wouldn't be an intimate family meal around my kitchen table. This was going to be a production, staged as carefully as any business presentation I'd ever given. My penthouse apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a pre-war building overlooking Central Park. The dining room was a masterpiece of understated elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, a table that could seat 12, and lighting that could be adjusted to create exactly the right atmosphere for any occasion. For this dinner, I wanted the atmosphere to be educational. I hired Marcus, the same server from Sunset Bay who had been so professional despite Chase's rudeness, to work the dinner. It was his night off, but when I explained what I was planning, he volunteered immediately. "Ms. LaRoche," he said during our planning call, "after what that man said to me and my colleagues, I wouldn't miss this for anything." I also arranged for a car service driver I knew from previous Manhattan visits. Coincidentally, it was Carlos, who had relocated from Key West to New York a few months earlier to be closer to his growing family. When I'd learned he was driving for a Manhattan car service, I'd made sure to request him specifically. "Lady," Carlos had said when I called him, "you've been so good to my family. If you want me to drive those people, I'll drive them. But I won't pretend to like it." "I'm not asking you to like it," I assured him. "I'm asking you to be professional."
Can you do that?
"For you? Yes, ma'am." The menu was carefully chosen as well. I selected dishes that required skilled preparation, that showcased the artistry and talent of the people who work in service industries. The kind of meal that's only possible when talented professionals take pride in their craft. Saturday evening arrived with perfect October weather, crisp and clear, with a kind of golden light that makes Manhattan look like a movie set. I dressed carefully in a navy blue cocktail dress that struck exactly the right note between elegant and approachable, paired with the diamond earrings David had given me for our 10th anniversary, back when I still believed our marriage might survive my ambitions. At 6:45, the doorman called to announce their arrival. I could hear uncertainty in his voice. After 3 months of media coverage, everyone knew the story of what had happened at Sunset Bay. "Send them up, please," I said, checking my reflection one final time in the foyer mirror. When the elevator opened, Chase and Clarissa stepped out looking like they were walking into a courtroom rather than a family dinner. Both were dressed expensively but conservatively, Chase in a dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Clarissa in a black dress that was elegant but somber, like she was attending a funeral. "Mother," Clarissa said, offering me the same air kiss she'd given me at the resort. But this time, there was nervousness beneath the gesture. "Vivian," Chase said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Thank you for inviting us. Your home is impressive." It was a peace offering of sorts, that compliment, and I accepted it as such.
"Thank you," I said.
"Please come in. Can I offer you drinks?" We moved into the living room, where I'd arranged comfortable seating with a view of Central Park. The autumn foliage was spectacular at this time of year, creating a tapestry of color that provided a beautiful backdrop for what I suspected would be a very ugly conversation. Marcus appeared as if by magic, professional in his white jacket and black tie, carrying a silver tray with cocktails. He'd prepared martinis for Chase and myself, and a cosmopolitan for Clarissa. I remembered their preferences from observing them at the resort. "Good evening," Marcus said warmly. "I hope you had a pleasant trip into the city." Clarissa smiled automatically. "Yes, thank you." Chase accepted his martini without acknowledgement, as if Marcus were invisible. Some people, apparently, never learn. But I saw Marcus's slight smile, and I knew he was remembering the same behavior from Key West. This evening was going to be very interesting indeed. We made small talk for the first few minutes, comments about the weather, the view, the city. Clarissa mentioned a charity auction she'd attended recently. Chase talked about a business deal he was working on, apparently forgetting that I knew he was currently unemployed. It was all perfectly civil, perfectly normal. Just a family dinner on a Saturday evening. Then Marcus announced that dinner was served, and we moved to the dining room. The table was set for three, with my grandmother's finest china and crystal that caught the light from the chandelier above. Candles provided intimate lighting, and fresh flowers from my favorite florist created centerpieces that were elegant without being ostentatious. I had positioned myself at the head of the table, with Chase and Clarissa seated across from each other. The arrangement gave me a clear view of both their faces, which would be important for what I had planned. Marcus served the first course, pan-seared scallops with a cauliflower puree and microgreens, with the kind of precision that comes from years of fine dining experience. Each plate was a work of art, perfectly composed and beautifully presented. "This looks wonderful," Clarissa said, and I could tell she was genuinely impressed. Whatever else my daughter had become, she still appreciated quality when she saw it. "Marcus is quite talented," I agreed. "He's actually a culinary school graduate who works at one of my properties in Florida. He's considering opening his own restaurant someday." Chase cut into his scallop without comment. To him, Marcus was still just the help, regardless of his training or ambitions. The conversation during the first course was carefully neutral territory. Clarissa asked about some of my other properties. I inquired about their lives in New York. Chase mentioned a gallery opening they'd attended. It was all very civilized, very adult. But I could sense the tension underneath. Both of them kept glancing at each other, as if they'd rehearsed what they were going to say and were waiting for the right moment to say it. The moment came during the main course, perfectly prepared beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction that Marcus had spent hours perfecting. "Mother," Clarissa said, setting down her fork and looking at me directly, "we need to talk about what happened in Florida." I took a sip of my wine, a 1998 Bordeaux that had been aging in my cellar for 15 years, and nodded. "I agree. We do." Chase leaned forward, his expression serious. "Vivian, I want to apologize for what happened at the resort. I was under a lot of stress with work, and I handled the situation poorly." "Poorly," I repeated, tasting the word. That's an interesting choice of description. "What Chase means," Clarissa interjected quickly, "is that the whole thing got blown out of proportion. Yes, there was a misunderstanding, but it didn't need to become such a public spectacle." I set down my wine glass and looked at them both. A misunderstanding.
Un public spectacle.
Those are interesting ways to describe what happened. "Look," Chase said, his voice carrying a hint of the old arrogance. "I admit I was out of line. But did you really need to humiliate us in front of all those people? Did you have to make it into such a scene? Did I make it into a scene?" I asked. "Or did you?" Clarissa reached across the table and touched my hand. "Mother, please. We all said things we regret. Can't we just move past it? We're family." I looked down at her perfectly manicured hand on mine, and for a moment, I remembered the little girl who used to hold my hand when we crossed busy streets, who would climb into my lap when she had nightmares, who once told me I was the strongest person in the world. That little girl was gone, but maybe some part of her was still reachable. "You're right," I said slowly. "We are family, and family should be able to be honest with each other." I stood up and walked to the sideboard, where I'd placed a small remote control. Marcus saw the gesture and nodded slightly. We'd rehearsed this moment. "Before we move forward," I said, "I think it's important that we all remember exactly what happened that day." I pressed a button on the remote, and the lights dimmed slightly. A panel slid back from the wall, revealing a large flat-screen television that had been hidden behind what appeared to be an oil painting. "You see," I continued, "I had the hotel's security footage transferred to digital format, and I thought it might be helpful for us to review it together." Chase and Clarissa both turned to look at the screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they realized what I was about to do. "Mother," Clarissa said quickly, "that's not necessary." "Oh, but I think it is," I said, pressing play. And suddenly, there we were in high definition, the scene that had changed everything playing out on the wall of my elegant dining room. The quality was perfect. You could see every expression, hear every word, understand every nuance of what had transpired. Chase pointing at me dismissively. Don't help her with the bags. She's just a maid. Clarissa's delighted laughter echoing through the lobby. My calm revelation of who I really was. Their shocked faces as understanding dawned. The applause from the other guests. The security escort to the door. I let the entire sequence play, maybe 10 minutes of footage that captured not just the main event, but the context around it. The other guests' reactions, the staff members' obvious discomfort, the transformation of a luxury hotel lobby into a stage for public humiliation. When it ended, the dining room fell completely silent except for the soft sound of traffic from Central Park West far below. Chase was staring at his plate. Clarissa was looking anywhere, but at the screen or at me. Marcus, who had been serving the wine, stood perfectly still, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes bright with satisfaction. Well, I said, returning to my seat and picking up my fork, now that we've all refreshed our memories about what actually happened, perhaps we can have an honest conversation about moving forward. The real dinner was just beginning. The silence that followed the video was unlike anything I'd experienced in my own dining room. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a family enjoying a meal together, or even the tense silence of people working through a disagreement. This was the dead air of people watching their carefully constructed version of reality crumble in real time. Chase was the first to recover, though his voice carried none of the confidence he displayed earlier in the evening. "Vivian," he said, still not looking directly at me, "I know how that looks, but you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, cutting into my beef with precise movements. "I understand that you called me just a maid in front of dozens of strangers. I understand that you instructed my staff not to serve me. I understand that you found my humiliation entertaining enough to share with everyone in that lobby." Clarissa shifted in her chair, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Mother, please. We came here tonight to apologize, to try to fix things between us." "Did you?" I asked, setting down my fork and leaning back in my chair. "Because what I heard earlier was Chase calling it a misunderstanding and you describing it as something that got blown out of proportion. Neither of those sounds like an apology to me." Marcus moved quietly around the table, refilling water glasses and removing plates with a kind of invisible efficiency that marks truly skilled service. I noticed that he avoided making eye contact with Chase, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he was enjoying this evening immensely. "Look," Chase said, his voice getting stronger as he fell back on familiar patterns of aggression, "I've already lost my job over this whole mess. Isn't that punishment enough? How long are you going to hold one moment of poor judgment against us?" One moment of poor judgment. The man still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. I stood up and walked to the windows overlooking Central Park, my hands clasped behind my back. From this height, the people walking through the park looked like tiny figures in a diorama, their individual struggles and triumphs invisible from my perspective. "Chase," I said without turning around, "do you know why I built this empire?" "Because you're a brilliant businesswoman," he offered, probably hoping flattery might help his cause. "No," I said. "I built it because I remember what it feels like to be invisible, to have people look right through you because your job doesn't matter to them, to be treated like you're less than human because you clean their messes and serve their food." I turned back to face them, and I could see that Clarissa was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks and dripping onto her untouched dinner. Every hotel I own, every employee I hire, every policy I implement is designed to ensure that no one who works for me ever feels the way I felt when I was 19 years old and scrubbing toilets for people who acted like I didn't exist. Chase opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. You see, that wasn't one moment of poor judgment in my hotel lobby. That was a window into who you really are. That was you showing everyone present, including my daughter, exactly how you view people whose only crime is working in service industries. I walked back to the table and stood behind my chair, my hands resting on its back. The really heartbreaking part, I continued, isn't even what you said to me. It's what you said to Carlos, a good man who was just trying to do his job. You called him an immigrant like it was a dirty word, dismissed his taxi as a piece of junk, and treated him like he was beneath your notice. Marcus had paused in his clearing of the table, clearly listening to every word. His professional mask had slipped slightly, revealing genuine emotion underneath. And through all of it, I said, my voice getting quieter and more dangerous, my daughter sat there and laughed. My daughter, whom I raised to be better than this, whom I worked 18-hour days to provide for, whom I trusted to carry on the values I tried to instill in her, she found it all hilarious. Clarissa's silent tears had become quiet sobs. Mother, I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I wasn't thinking. You weren't thinking, I agreed. But you were feeling. And what you were feeling was superiority. Amusement at watching someone you considered beneath you being put in her place. I walked around the table to stand beside her chair. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of maternal instinct. She was my baby, my only child, and she was in pain. But then I remembered the sound of her laughter echoing through that hotel lobby. Do you want to know what the worst part is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not that you laughed at me being humiliated. It's that you laughed at the idea of being associated with honest work. You were raised by a woman who cleaned toilets, who scrubbed floors, who built everything you've ever enjoyed on the foundation of that work. And you found the very idea of it shameful. Chase suddenly stood up, apparently deciding that offense was his best defense. Enough, he said, his voice rising. I came here tonight to apologize, to try to make peace with you. But if you're going to sit here and lecture us like we're children, if you're going to hold one bad day over our heads forever, then maybe we should just leave. The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Marcus froze in place, holding a stack of plates. Clarissa stopped crying and stared at her husband with something approaching horror. And I felt something inside me crystallize into perfect, diamond-hard clarity. Actually, I said, walking to the sideboard and opening a drawer, I think that's an excellent idea. I pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents, and placed it on the table between them. Before you go, though, there are a few things we need to discuss. Chase looked at the folder suspiciously. What is that? These, I said, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table, are the consequences of your actions over the past 3 months. The first document was a letter from Chase's former law firm, formally declining to represent him in any future legal matters. The second was a credit report showing that several of their credit cards had been canceled due to reputation concerns. The third was a notice from their exclusive country club, informing them that their membership was being reviewed following recent publicity. You see, I said, my voice perfectly calm, your behavior that day didn't just go viral on social media. It also reached some very important people in your social and professional circles. People who have standards about the kind of individuals they want to associate with. Chase was flipping through the documents, his face getting redder with each page. You did this, he said, looking up at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You used your connections to destroy us. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. I simply made sure that the right people saw the video of who you really are. What they did with that information was entirely their choice. I pulled out another set of documents, bank statements, loan applications, financial records. I also took the liberty of calling in some favors, I continued. You see, when you have my resources and connections, you learn interesting things about people's finances. Chase grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly. I watched as understanding dawned on his face. Your business ventures, I explained, have been largely funded by loans that I personally guaranteed, believing they were investments in my daughter's future. I've called in those guarantees, effective immediately. You can't do that, Chase said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. When I guaranteed those loans, I included clauses that allowed me to call them in if circumstances changed. Your public behavior and the resulting damage to my family's reputation constitute such a change. I pulled out another set of documents, bank statements, loan applications, financial records. I also took the liberty of reviewing Clarissa's trust fund. The trust was set up with very specific moral character clauses. Behavior that brings shame on the family name, such as viral videos of you abusing service workers, triggers immediate review of all benefits. I turned to Clarissa, who was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Clarissa, I said gently, your trust fund is suspended indefinitely. The apartment I bought you as a wedding gift has been transferred back to my name. The credit cards I've been paying for canceled. The car lease I guaranteed has been terminated. She looked up at me with the kind of shock that comes from having your entire world shifted without warning. Mother, you can't. We have nothing without those things. How are we supposed to live? The same way millions of other people live, I said. By working for it. Chase slammed his hand down on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. This is insane. You're destroying your own daughter's life because of your wounded pride. I'm giving my daughter the opportunity to learn what I learned when I was 19 years old. I corrected. That work has dignity. That self-respect comes from earning what you have. That treating other people well isn't optional. It's fundamental to being a decent human being. I walked back to the sideboard where I had prepared for multiple possible outcomes of this evening. I pulled out the manila folder I'd hoped I wouldn't need to use. This is a job application, I said, placing it in front of Clarissa. It's for a housekeeping position at one of my hotels in New Jersey. Entry level, minimum wage plus benefits, with opportunities for advancement based on performance and attitude. I had it prepared because I hoped, despite everything, that you might be ready to learn what real work means. Clarissa stared at the application like it was a snake that might bite her. If you want back into my life, I continued, if you want any chance of rebuilding our relationship, you'll take this job. You'll learn what it means to work for a living. You'll develop empathy for the people you've spent your entire adult life looking down on. You want me to be a maid, Clarissa whispered. I want you to be the woman I raised you to be, I said. Someone who understands that there's no shame in honest work and that the measure of a person isn't their bank balance, it's how they treat others. Chase stood up so violently that his chair toppled backward. This is blackmail. You're holding your daughter hostage to satisfy your own sick need for revenge. This is consequences, I said, my voice ice cold. Something you've apparently never experienced before. Marcus had quietly retreated to the kitchen, giving us privacy for what was clearly a family crisis. But I could see him hovering near the doorway, ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. Clarissa picked up the job application with trembling hands. Mother, please. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do whatever you want, but please don't make me do this. You're asking me to give up everything I am. I'm asking you to discover who you could be, I replied, without trust funds and credit cards and unearned privileges. I'm asking you to find out if there's anything worthwhile underneath all that entitlement. Chase grabbed Clarissa's arm, trying to pull her toward the door. Come on, we're leaving. We don't have to listen to this. But Clarissa didn't move. She sat there staring at the job application, and I could see something working behind her eyes. Fear, maybe, but also something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. What if I said yes? She asked quietly. What if I took the job? Would that really change anything between us? I don't know, I admitted, but it would be a start. It would show me that you're willing to learn, to grow, to become someone worthy of respect. And what about Chase? She asked, glancing at her husband, who was standing behind her chair like a guard dog. I looked at Chase Morgan, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. He was a man who had built his entire identity on looking down on others, and now he was facing a world where that behavior had consequences. He would never change, never grow, never become anything more than what he already was. Chase is welcome to find his own path, I said. But he's not welcome in my life, my businesses, or my family. That bridge is burned beyond repair. The silence that followed was broken by the soft sound of Clarissa signing her name at the bottom of the job application. Chase stared at her in shock. Clarissa, what are you doing? We can figure this out without crawling to her. No, Clarissa said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all evening. We can't.
You lost your job, Chase.
We're about to lose everything else. And maybe Mother's right. Maybe I need to learn what it means to work for something. She stood up and walked around the table to where I was standing. For the first time in years, she looked directly into my eyes without defiance or resentment. I'll take the job, she said. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your respect back. I felt something crack inside my chest, not breaking but opening, like a door that had been locked for 3 long months finally turning on its hinges. It won't be easy, I warned her. You'll start at the bottom. You'll clean toilets and strip beds and carry heavy loads. Your coworkers will know who you are, and you'll have to prove yourself every single day. I understand, she said, though I wasn't sure she really did. Chase was backing toward the door, his face cycling through rage and disbelief. Fine, he snarled. If this is what you want, you can have it. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you debase yourself for your mother's amusement. Clarissa turned to face him, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen since she was a child, strength. Then don't, she said simply. Don't stick around. Don't wait for me. Don't pretend this marriage was ever about anything more than my trust fund. The words hit Chase like physical blows. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You'll regret this, he said finally. Both of you will regret this. The only thing I regret, I said, walking to the front door and opening it for him, is that it took me this long to see who you really are. Chase stormed out without another word, and I closed the door behind him with a sense of finality that felt like the end of a very long, very difficult chapter. Clarissa and I stood in my foyer, looking at each other across 3 months of pain and anger and disappointment. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her, but there was something in her posture that reminded me of the determined little girl who used to insist she could tie her own shoes. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. You can, I said. You're my daughter. You're stronger than you know. What if I'm not? What if I fail? I reached out and touched her face gently, the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. Then you'll get back up and try again, I said. That's what we do. That's who we are. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, carrying Clarissa's purse and coat. Ms. LaRoche, he said respectfully, Carlos is downstairs whenever you're ready for him to drive you home. Clarissa looked confused. I don't have a home anymore. You have a home, I said. It might not be the apartment I bought you, and it might not be filled with expensive furniture, but you have a place to go. I've arranged for a small efficiency apartment near the hotel where you'll be working. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. She nodded, accepting this new reality with something approaching grace. As she gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at me. Mother, she said, that day at the hotel, I'm not proud of who I was. I'm not proud of what I laughed at. I want you to know that. I know, I said. And I want you to know that no matter what happened between us, no matter how disappointed I've been, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping you'd find your way back to the person I knew you could be. After she left, I stood alone in my dining room, looking at the remnants of our dinner. The fine china, the crystal glasses, the elegant table setting that had been the backdrop for such an ugly conversation. It all seemed suddenly hollow. But then I thought about Clarissa signing that job application, about the look in her eyes when she told Chase not to wait for her, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, some good could come from all this pain. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Can I clear the table, Ms. LaRoche?"
Please do, I said.
And Marcus? "Thank you for everything tonight. I know that couldn't have been easy." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. "Actually, ma'am, it was one of the most satisfying dinners I've ever served." As he cleared away the dishes and folded the napkins, I walked to the windows and looked out at Central Park. The city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, my daughter was beginning a journey that would either destroy her or rebuild her into someone worthy of the name LaRoche. Only time would tell which it would be. But for the first time in 3 months, I had hope. 6 months later, I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about redemption. "Ms. LaRoche," said Janet Morrison, the general manager of our New Jersey property, "I need to speak with you about Clarissa." I was in my office, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed LaRoche hotels continuing to break revenue records. The Sunset Bay story, as business magazines now called it, had become a case study taught in hospitality management programs across the country. We were booked solid through the next 2 years, and I'd just signed contracts to acquire 3 new properties in Europe. But none of that mattered as much as the tone in Janet's voice. "Is she in trouble?" I asked, setting down my coffee and giving Janet my full attention.
"No, ma'am," Janet said.
"Quite the opposite. I'm calling because well, she's extraordinary." I leaned back in my chair, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Extraordinary? MS. LaRoche, in 30 years of hotel management, I have never seen a new employee work as hard as your daughter has over the past 6 months. She shows up early, stays late, volunteers for the worst shifts, and never complains about anything." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that I hadn't experienced since Clarissa was a child bringing home straight A's on her report card. "She started in housekeeping as you requested," Janet continued. "Within 2 months, she was training new employees. Within 4 months, she was assistant head of housekeeping. Last week, I promoted her to front desk supervisor." "Front desk supervisor?" I repeated, genuinely shocked. "She earned it," Janet said firmly. "She knows every aspect of hotel operations now, from the ground up. But more than that, she treats every guest and every coworker with respect and kindness. The staff adores her. The guests request her specifically when they have problems. She's become everything you always said a LaRoche manager should be." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the Manhattan skyline and thinking about the strange paths life takes us down. 6 months ago, I had watched my daughter walk away from everything she'd ever known, embarking on a journey I'd forced her to take. Now she was apparently thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. That afternoon, I made an unannounced visit to the New Jersey property. The Meadowlands LaRoche was one of our smaller hotels, 150 rooms of understated elegance designed primarily for business travelers. It wasn't as glamorous as our Manhattan flagship or as scenic as Sunset Bay, but it was efficient, well-run, and profitable. I entered through the lobby at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, during the quiet period between checkout and evening arrivals. The space was immaculate, with fresh flowers on every table and not a speck of dust on any surface. Behind the front desk stood a young woman in a crisp navy blazer and white blouse, her hair pulled back in a professional style, her makeup subtle but polished. It took me a moment to recognize her as my daughter. Clarissa had always been beautiful, but there was something different about her now. She carried herself with a confidence I'd never seen before, not the brittle arrogance of her entitled years, but the solid assurance of someone who had earned their place in the world. She was helping an elderly businessman who seemed frustrated about something with his reservation. I watched as she listened patiently, consulted her computer, made several phone calls, and ultimately arranged for him to be upgraded to a suite at no extra charge. "You're a lifesaver," the man said as she handed him his new key card. "My wife is joining me tomorrow for our anniversary, and this room will be perfect." "Congratulations on your anniversary," Clarissa said warmly. "We'll make sure housekeeping includes some champagne and chocolates as our gift." After the guests left, I approached the counter. Clarissa looked up with her professional greeting ready, then stopped mid-sentence when she saw who it was. "Mother," she said, and for a moment I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to see how you were doing," I said. "Janet spoke very highly of you." A blush crept up Clarissa's neck. "Janet's been wonderful. Everyone here has been wonderful, actually. Much more patient with me than I deserved." Another guest approached the desk, a young woman with two small children who looked harried and tired. Clarissa immediately shifted her attention, greeting the family with genuine warmth. "We're the Hendersons," the woman said. "We have a reservation, but I'm hoping you can help us with something. My daughter forgot her favorite stuffed animal at home, and she's pretty upset about it." "Oh no," Clarissa said, coming around the counter to kneel at the little girl's eye level. "What kind of stuffed animal was it?" "A purple elephant named Peanut," the little girl said through tears. "Well," Clarissa said seriously, "we can't replace Peanut, because every elephant is special and different. But I know where there's a gift shop that might have a friend for Peanut, someone who can keep your room company until you get home to him. Would that help?" The little girl nodded eagerly, and Clarissa spent the next 10 minutes getting the family checked in, arranging for a crib to be brought to their room, and personally escorting them to the gift shop to find a suitable temporary companion. When she returned, I was still standing at the front desk, but now I wasn't alone. Janet Morrison had appeared, along with several other staff members who had recognized me. "Miss LaRoche," said Thomas, the head of housekeeping, "your daughter is the best supervisor we've ever had. She works harder than any of us, and she never asks us to do anything she wouldn't do herself. She stripped beds with us for 2 months," added Maria, one of the room attendants. "Got her hands dirty, learned every job from the bottom up. Never once acted like she was too good for the work." I looked at Clarissa, who was clearly embarrassed by the praise, but also glowing with pride. "She's earned every promotion," Janet said. "And I mean earned. No special treatment, no shortcuts. She's proven herself at every level." "Thank you," I said to the assembled staff. "That means more to me than you know." As the group dispersed, Clarissa and I were left alone at the front desk. The lobby was quiet except for the soft sound of classical music playing through hidden speakers. "How are you really doing?" I asked. Clarissa considered the question seriously before answering. "I'm happy," she said, and I could hear the surprise in her own voice. "I wake up every morning knowing that I've earned my place here. I've earned the respect of my coworkers and the trust of my guests. I've never felt that before." "And Chase?" Her expression hardened slightly. "Chase filed for divorce 3 months ago. Apparently, he found someone else, someone whose trust fund wasn't suspended." "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't really sorry at all. "I'm not," Clarissa said firmly. "He never loved me. He loved what I could provide for him. When that was gone, so was he." She paused, looking down at her hands that I noticed were no longer perfectly manicured, that showed the signs of honest work. "I'm ashamed of who I was when I was with him," she continued. "The way I treated people, the way I looked down on others, The way I laughed at your humiliation that day in Key West. I can't believe I ever thought that was acceptable. We all make mistakes, I said gently. That wasn't a mistake, Mother. That was who I had become. Entitled, cruel, thoughtless. You did the right thing, cutting me off. It was the only way I was going to learn. I felt tears pricking my eyes. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know, she said, but it worked. Look at me now. I'm proud of my work. I respect the people I work with, and I understand what you've built here. Really understand it for the first time. A family with teenagers approached the desk, and Clarissa excused herself to help them check in. I watched as she handled their requests with efficiency and warmth, as she arranged restaurant recommendations and explained the hotel's amenities with genuine enthusiasm. When they left, she turned back to me. Mother, she said, I know I have a long way to go to earn your trust back. But I want you to know that every day I work here, I think about the woman who raised me. The woman who built all this from nothing, who never forgot where she came from, who treats every employee with dignity and respect. She straightened her shoulders, and I saw myself at her age, determined, proud, ready to work for everything she wanted. I want to be that woman too, she said. I want to be worthy of the LaRoche name. I walked around the counter and pulled her into my arms, really held her, the way I hadn't since she was a child. You already are, I whispered into her hair. You already are. 6 months later, I stood in the ballroom of our flagship Manhattan hotel, looking out at an audience of hospitality industry leaders, business executives, and media representatives gathered for the annual LaRoche Hotel's Leadership Conference. At the podium stood Clarissa, now the general manager of our New Jersey property, delivering a keynote address on servant leadership and the dignity of work. 18 months ago, she was saying, I was a person who had never worked a day in her life. I looked down on service workers, treated them as invisible, and believed that my comfort was more important than their dignity. The audience was hanging on every word. This story, the story of the hotel heiress who fell from grace and earned her way back through honest labor, had become legendary in our industry. My mother forced me to confront who I had become by taking away everything I hadn't earned, Clarissa continued. She gave me a choice: continue being the entitled, thoughtless person I'd become, or learn what it means to work for respect instead of inheriting it. She looked directly at me in the audience and smiled. It was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, because through that work, through cleaning toilets and stripping beds and learning every job from the ground up, I discovered something I'd never had before: self-respect. The knowledge that I had earned my place in the world through my own efforts. The applause was thunderous. I saw tears in many eyes, saw people nodding in recognition of their own struggles, their own journeys from humble beginnings to professional success. After the conference, Clarissa and I walked through Central Park as the sun set over Manhattan. She was different now, not just in her confidence or her work ethic, but in her fundamental understanding of what mattered in life. Do you ever regret it? I asked as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. Giving up the trust fund, the apartment, all that comfort? Clarissa was quiet for a long moment, watching a young family feed ducks near the water's edge. Every morning when I wake up, she said finally, I know that everything I have, my job, my apartment, my respect for my coworkers, I earned it myself. I've never felt that before. It's better than any trust fund could ever be. She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw the woman I'd always hoped she could become. You gave me something more valuable than money, Mother. You gave me the chance to discover who I really am underneath all that privilege. And it turns out, I actually like that person. As we walked back toward my building, she slipped her arm through mine the way she used to when she was little.
Thank you, she said simply.
For everything. For not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. I never gave up on you, I said. I just had to help you find your way back to yourself. That night, as I stood in my penthouse looking out at the city lights, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this place. What had started as the worst day of my life, the day my daughter laughed at my humiliation, had ultimately become the catalyst for something beautiful. Her transformation from entitled heiress to respected professional, from thoughtless consumer to dignified contributor. Chase, I'd heard through mutual acquaintances, was struggling. His new relationship had ended badly, his reputation in business circles remained toxic, and he was working as a junior analyst at a third-tier firm for a fraction of his former salary. He'd burned too many bridges, offended too many people, and never learned the fundamental lesson that actions have consequences. But that was his story to live with. Mine was about second chances, about the power of honest work to transform a person's character, and about the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter who had finally found their way back to each other. Some people never get the chance to redeem themselves. Some mistakes can never be forgiven or forgotten. But sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined and willing to do the hard work of becoming better than you were, sometimes you get to write a different ending to your story. Clarissa had written hers with calloused hands and early mornings, with patience and humility and the gradual earning of respect. She had learned what I learned 39 years ago in that Boston hotel, that there is profound dignity in work well done, regardless of what that work is. And now, as I watched the lights of my empire sparkle across the city, I knew that when the time came to pass on what I'd built, it would go to someone who truly understood its value, not just the profits and properties, but the principles that made it all worthwhile. My daughter had finally come home, not to wealth and privilege, but to something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that she had earned her place in the world through her own merit, her own effort, her own choice to be better than she had been. In the end, that was the only inheritance that really mattered. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Her True Stories. If this story of redemption, dignity, and second chances touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have so many more powerful stories from incredible women just waiting to be told. Until next time, keep standing strong, keep supporting each other, and never forget that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their circumstances. You are worthy, you are valuable, and your story matters.